The message vibrated against my mahogany desk for exactly 3 seconds before I looked down. Don't come to my wedding, Lisa. Nathan's family thinks I'm an only child. Keep it that way. Mom and Dad agree it's for the best. I stared at the screen while sitting in the glass-walled boardroom of my firm, Smith & Associates. Across from me, my VP, Rebecca, was finalizing the details of a $37 million acquisition of a historic hotel. My jaw tightened, but I simply turned the phone face down. My sister Jane's wedding to Nathan Brown was in 3 weeks. Nathan's parents, Robert and Celine Brown, were the gatekeepers of Boston's elite, and Jane had convinced them she came from a lineage of polished success, not a family with a failed artist sister who drives a 2012 Honda and lives in a studio apartment. "You're an embarrassment, Lisa," the follow-up text read. "Nathan's mother would die if she saw your life. Just don't ruin this for me." They had no idea that the old car was a choice of reliability, or that I stayed in the studio because I practically lived at the office. They had no idea that in exactly 18 days, Forbes would announce the architect of the decade. I typed one word back: understood. Was I wrong to let my sister's only child lie play out until the morning the magazine hit 300 hotel rooms? Or was this long overdue justice? Tell me in the comments if you'd have warned her. Rebecca didn't say anything as I leaned back in my chair, the city of Boston sprawling out behind me in a grid of amber lights. She knew the silence meant I was processing a family tax. For 5 years, I had been the ghost in the machine of the Smith family. I looked at the confirmation on my computer screen. A $15,000 wire transfer for a florist deposit. Jane claimed she couldn't cover without Nathan Brown noticing the dip in their joint account. It was a routine I knew by heart. Jane would call me, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, lamenting how hard it was to live up to the Brown family's expectations. She'd mention a car repair, a designer dress, or a venue surcharge, and I would send the money. I never asked for it back, and she never asked how I had it. To her and to our parents, Thomas and Claudia, I was still the unpredictable artist, living on the edge of failure, likely surviving on credit cards and delusion. "She texted again," I said, my voice flat. Rebecca sighed, adjusted her glasses, and set the acquisition papers for the historic manor on my desk. "The one where you officially don't exist?" "The one where my 2012 Honda would lower the property value of the Four Seasons," I replied, looking at my grandmother's simple watch. Last Christmas, I had sat at my parents' dinner table while Thomas mocked my little projects. He had no idea that the check I'd sent for his heart surgery 6 months prior hadn't come from a generous anonymous donor at the hospital, but from the daughter he told to get a real job because science and art were just hobbies. I watched Claudia nod as Jane bragged about her old money lifestyle, a lifestyle built on the $70,000 I'd funneled into her accounts over the last 3 years to keep her secretly afloat. I was the invisible provider. I paid for the very life Jane used to pretend I was beneath her. I had spent years hoping they would value the daughter who stayed up until 4 a.m. in the workshop, but they only valued the daughter who could marry a Brown. I wasn't just staying quiet anymore. I was letting the clock run out. If this story stirred something in you, rage, relief, or that quiet thrill of justice served, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Celine Brown was the type of woman who could tell the thread count of a tablecloth just by the way the light hit the weave. During the garden brunch at the Brown estate, she sat at the head of a long white linen table like a queen presiding over a court of forensic auditors. Jane was a masterpiece of manufactured elegance that afternoon, wearing a $3,000 silk sheath that I had paid for under the guise of an early wedding gift. Celine spoke of legacy, of the Brown lineage, and of the unfortunate people who lacked the discipline to maintain a proper social standing. Jane leaned in, her voice a perfect, breathy imitation of the New England elite. When Robert Brown asked about her childhood, Jane didn't even blink. "It was very quiet," she said, her smile practiced and porcelain. "Just me and my parents. I always wished for a sibling to share it with, but I suppose being an only child made me more independent." I wasn't there to hear the words in person, but I saw the digital trail of the betrayal. Claudia had sent me dozens of photos from the event, gushing about how perfectly Jane had fit in. The real sting wasn't just Jane's lie, it was the complicit silence of my parents. Thomas, a man who usually had a loud, booming opinion on everything from politics to the local weather, sat next to Robert Brown and simply nodded. He and Claudia didn't correct her. They didn't mention the daughter who had paid for their private health insurance, or the daughter who had spent her teenage years tutoring Jane just so she could graduate. They simply let me vanish into the background noise of Jane's ambition. To the Browns, standards weren't just about wealth. They were about a clean, unblemished narrative. They were the gatekeepers of a world where one failed relative, a sister who lived in a studio and drove a decade-old car, could tarnish a century of networking. Jane knew this. She knew that in Celine's eyes, my life was a liability. My parents had traded my existence for a seat at a table where the silver was polished, but the conversations were hollow. They wanted the Brown name more than they wanted their own truth. I sat in my workshop that night, the smell of wood stain and the weight of my grandmother's watch heavy on my wrist, realizing that Jane had built her new life on a foundation of sand. The Browns had high standards for family, but they were about to find out that my standards for the truth were absolute. Eric didn't look like a man who spent his life writing about billionaires. He looked like a man who appreciated the weight of a well-placed beam. When he walked into my workshop, the 10,000 square foot facility Jane called my messy craft room, he stopped dead. He ran a hand over the prototype of the mahogany staircase we were shipping to the Carlisle Hotel. "Lisa," he said, checking his digital recorder, "most people with a $180 million valuation are sitting in glass towers in the financial district. Why are you covered in sawdust?" "Because the towers are just for show," I said, wiping my hands on a rag. "The work happens here. I like to be close to the grain." Eric laughed, but his eyes remained sharp. He started asking about the upcoming cover story for the 24th, the day of Jane's wedding. "The architect of the decade," he mused. "It's a powerful headline, Lisa. Your family must be incredibly proud to see you disrupting an entire industry through pure innovation." I felt the familiar hollow ache in my chest. I thought about my father, Thomas, dismissively calling my career a little project while I secretly paid for his heart surgery. I thought about the text I'd received an hour ago from Jane, asking me to park my rusty Honda 3 blocks away from her final dress fitting so Celine Brown wouldn't see it. They've always encouraged education, I said, using the neutral line I'd practiced. But they've been quite private about my success. I think they prefer to see me as the practical one. The secret millionaire, Eric said, grinning as he looked at the high-end furniture designs. The ultimate hidden identity, but the magazine hits doorsteps on Saturday morning. The world and your family is going to see exactly what you've built. I know, I said. He looked out the window at the parking lot where my 2012 Honda sat between two of my company's $150,000 delivery trucks. Why keep the car, Lisa? My sources say you're finalizing a $12 million penthouse acquisition. Because that car reminds me of who I was when no one in that wedding guest list believed in me, I said. And right now, it's the only thing about me my sister actually sees. I want to keep it that way for exactly 18 more days. The final text didn't arrive with a bang, but with the cold, clinical precision of a scalpel. I was in the middle of reviewing the final proofs for the Forbes cover when my phone lit up on the drafting table. Jane's name appeared, followed by a message that felt like she was finally scrubbing the last remnants of our childhood off her shoes. Don't come to the wedding, Lisa. Nathan's family thinks I'm an only child. Keep it that way. Mom and Dad agree it's for the best. You're an embarrassment to the image we've built. Nathan's father is Robert Brown. They have standards. Your studio and that 2012 Honda would ruin everything. Please, for once, just don't exist. I stared at the screen for exactly 3 seconds. I didn't cry. I didn't even feel the urge to call her and scream about the $15,000 I'd wired her for the florist just 4 days ago. I simply felt a strange, hollow sense of freedom. The only child lie was now a matter of record. Rebecca walked into the office holding 2 cups of coffee. She saw my face and set the cups down slowly. She did it, didn't she? I no longer exist, I said, sliding the phone toward her. I am an official liability to the Smith-Brown merger. Rebecca read the message, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. She looked at the Forbes proofs on my desk, the image of me standing in the center of my $180 million empire, the architect of the decade headline mocking the word failure. The publication date is still the 24th, Rebecca said quietly. The morning of the wedding. Magazines hit every doorstep in the 4 Seasons at 8 a.m. I can call Eric right now. I can ask him to delay it. We can bury the story for a week. I looked out at the workshop where my team was finishing a project for a museum that Nathan's family sat on the board of. I thought about every time Jane had called me a hobbyist while cashed my checks. I thought about my parents agreeing that my absence was for the best. No, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Do absolutely nothing. Let the universe handle this one. I picked up my phone and typed a single word back to Jane. Understood. The trap wasn't mine, it was hers. She had built a wedding out of glass, and the truth was about to hit it like a sledgehammer. I wasn't going to crash her wedding. I was just going to let the world find out I existed. The city was a graveyard of silent towers at 3 a.m, the only movement being the occasional sweep of a security light across the workshop floor. I was sitting at my drafting table, the scent of fresh cedar and the cold hum of the ventilation system, the only things keeping me tethered to the reality of the clock. My phone buzzed, the vibration jarring against the wood. It was Jane. Lisa, she whispered, her voice a frantic, jagged mess. I need you to listen. Nathan's father is doing a final audit of the wedding expenses tomorrow morning. There's an $18,000 gap in the catering deposit. I I moved some funds around to cover my dress, and if Robert Brown sees the discrepancy, he'll think I'm financially unstable. He'll think our family is a mess. I leaned back, staring at the Forbes proofs lying next to my coffee mug. The irony was a physical weight. The sister who had erased me from her life 4 days ago to protect her image was now calling me in the dead of night to save it. You told the Browns I don't exist, Jane, I said, my voice low and steady. Why are you calling a ghost for $18,000? Because you've always been the practical one, she snapped, the sweetness vanishing as quickly as it had appeared. Mom said you'd understand. This isn't just for me, it's for the family name. If I marry into the Browns, Thomas and Claudia never have to worry again. You're always so selfish about your art projects. Just do this one thing for me. I'll pay you back when the trust fund kicks in. I knew she wouldn't. She had siphoned $70,000 from me in 3 years and never once asked how I earned it. She was plotting the perfect entrance into high society, and I was just the invisible bridge she intended to burn the moment she crossed it. I'll wire the money, I said. Thank you, she breathed, already sounding bored now that the problem was solved. And remember, don't show up. Nathan's mother is very observant. She hung up. I didn't go back to sleep. Instead, I called Rebecca. The catering is covered. The wedding is definitely happening. Ensure the Forbes delivery is locked for 8 a.m. sharp. I wasn't just paying for a wedding anymore. I was paying for the largest audience my sister would ever have for her own undoing. The Four Seasons lobby was a cathedral of marble and white lilies at 8 a.m., the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the quiet efficiency of five-star service. While Jane was in the bridal suite having her hair pinned into a $4,000 tiara, the object of proof was being distributed. 300 copies of Forbes were placed on the door handles and breakfast trays of every guest in the Brown wedding block. I sat in my workshop 43 floors above the city and watched the first ripple of the tidal wave through my phone. Rebecca was across from me, her laptop open to the Forbes digital metrics. We're trending, she whispered, and the Four Seasons concierge just confirmed the delivery is complete. On the cover, I looked exactly like the woman Jane had uninvited. A simple white shirt, no jewelry, my face focused on a blueprint. But the headline changed the context of my existence. The $180 million designer disrupting luxury. Underneath, the sidebar Eric had fought for was the final nail. Lisa Smith, daughter of Ohio teachers Thomas and Claudia Smith, is the invisible hand behind the decade's most iconic hotel interiors. The first call came at 8:14 a.m. It was my mother, Claudia. I didn't answer. The second was Thomas. I let it go to voicemail. Then the floodgates opened. Jane's texts were a jagged descent into mania. What did you do? Celine is holding the magazine in the lobby. She's asking why I never mentioned a sister. She's asking about the Ohio teachers. Lisa, call me right now. You're ruining everything. At 9 a.m., I finally listened to a voicemail from Robert Brown himself. His voice was gravelly and confused. Lisa, this is Robert Brown. My wife is quite struck by this morning's delivery. I apologize for not knowing about your work sooner. Your sister seems to have miscommunicated your whereabouts. I'd be honored to introduce you to our board. I set the phone down and took a slow sip of coffee. For years, I had been the family's emergency fund, the disappointment they only acknowledged when a bill was due. Now the Browns, the very old money Jane was so desperate to impress, were the ones holding the receipts of her deception. Jane had wanted a wedding without an embarrassment. She got it, but she also got a wedding where the only thing people were talking about wasn't the bride, but the sister she had tried to bury. The silence in the workshop was finally broken by the low hum of my private line. It wasn't my mother or Jane this time. It was Robert Brown. His voice, usually so controlled and formidable in the business journals, sounded uncharacteristically soft. He told me he was holding the morning issue of Forbes and had just finished the article. He wasn't calling to yell or demand I save Jane's reputation. Instead, he wanted to know why his daughter-in-law had spent 6 months pretending the most influential designer in the Northeast didn't exist. "Lisa," he said, "my foundation has been trying to book a consultation with your firm for a year. I think it's time we met properly." I realized then that Jane's fear had been her own prison. She had assumed that old money, like the Browns, only valued a shallow, curated image. She didn't understand that to people like Robert and Celine, real power, the kind I had built in sawdust and silence, was the only currency that actually mattered. While Jane was sobbing in the Four Seasons bridal suite, watching her manufactured world shatter, the very people she was trying to impress were reaching out to me with the respect she had always denied me. My phone showed 46 missed calls from my family. I didn't listen to the messages. I already knew what they said. The transition from embarrassment to milestone happened the moment my net worth was printed in bold ink. I was no longer the daughter who lived in a studio. I was a success they wanted to claim. But I was done being their emergency money source or their hidden secret. I looked at the 2012 Honda in the lot and then at the acquisition papers for my new estate. I wasn't just Lisa anymore. I was a woman who had reclaimed her name by simply refusing to lie for people who didn't deserve her truth. I turned my phone off, picked up my drafting pencil, and got back to work. I had finally built something that didn't require their permission to exist. I'm choosing my peace over their old money image from now on. Have you ever been the invisible provider for people who didn't actually value you? Share your story in the comments. I'm reading them all today. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories.